"Don't worry," she murmured in my ear. "Here, nobody pays attention to these things." I didn't have time to relax my body when I felt her hand on my waistband, massaging, while her mouth sought mine to settle into a rough kiss. It was so fiery and wild that I found it overwhelming at first, but I liked it because Isabella was in control of the situation. In life, there's a rule: those who appear shy can often be the most enigmatic. I found myself caught up with one such individual, undoubtedly off limits to me. My name is Richard, a man in his 60s. I became a father at a young age, and now my 3 sons are grown, especially Alexander, whom everyone claims is my favorite. While I never thought of myself as having a favorite, I couldn't deny the pride Alexander brought me. So when he introduced Isabella to the family, I felt joy seeing him begin his own family. At first glance, Isabella seemed a lovely, demure, and exceedingly kind young woman, a quality that pleased my devout wife Mary, who believed she embodied our household's values. However, I'd soon discover she wasn't as innocent as she seemed. On an evening out for sushi at a ritzy restaurant, Isabella arrived in a modest dress, revealing little skin, with subtle makeup and a natural hairstyle. She always looked impeccable, but that night, there was an aura of flawless perfection about her that she seemed like the epitome of grace. She was so gracious and engaging in conversation with my wife, my son, and me, that if it weren't for what unfolded later, I might have sworn Alexander had married an angel. Until it happened. One call would completely change my perception of her. "I already told you, I can't," she murmured. I was leaving the men's bathroom when I found her on the side, talking on her cell phone as if she didn't want anyone to find out. I stayed semi-hidden, spying on her conversation. That attitude was what alarmed me, since I considered myself a very perceptive person who didn't miss anything. So when I saw her speak in a low tone and look around, I knew something was wrong. And I should know I have an appointment with Alexander's parents. "No, I can't cancel." Then she let out a sigh, almost like a groan. "I want to go too, but those hateful people won't shut up." Those words took me by surprise, and I gasped. I had never expected that this would be Isabella's perception of us, much less that words would come out of her mouth that in our home we would not consider decent. "Can you leave me the address?" "I promise I'll go as soon as I'm done here." Upon hearing that, I decided to return to the table. Mary noticed my general change in attitude and asked me what had happened. I did not want to go into details with my wife at that time, as I did not want to jump to conclusions. However, my mind was already beginning to wander. Was Isabella cheating on my son? Would she have another partner and want our family's money? Those were the questions that kept running through my head at that moment. I was convinced that I had to find out if what my intuition was telling me was true, even if I had to go to the trouble of spying on my daughter-in-law. At the end of the evening, Isabella told Alexander that she preferred to go home alone. After several minutes of discussion, in which my son insisted on taking her, I intervened, claiming that this spoke well of the person Isabella was, since it showed that she was self-sufficient and could afford something as simple as taking a taxi. "Let her go," I murmured, staring into her eyes. "Young ladies like a little independence sometimes, don't they?" She nodded. She took a strand of her perfectly placed hair and brushed it behind her ear, smiling sweetly. At that moment, a spark ignited in me, so I offered to pay for the taxi and told her to put the address into the taxi service I had on my phone. She hesitated but finally relented and wrote down the address. As we said goodbye to her, my mind flashed back to the scene in the bathroom, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. That was the last time I tried to ignore my doubts. But in the end, I succumbed to what I felt I should do. There was something more behind Isabella's charming facade, and I needed to know what it was to alert my darling son. We continued the way to the house. I decided to drop my wife off at our house, and then make up a silly excuse for her that Xavier, one of my college classmates she didn't know, had returned to the city to meet up with me again. I knew that Mary would not suspect anything, since in her eyes, I was a perfect husband who had never committed any fault. So a few pamperings and the promise that I would not return so late were enough to leave through the door of my house in search of Isabella's secret. 20 minutes passed when I had reached the address in the app's history. There was no residence or anything resembling a house in that place. Instead, a large bar stood and posed opposingly on the street, its facade illuminated by flickering neon, announcing that the night was just beginning. The music escaped through the cracks in the door, carrying with it vibrations of what my children like to call electronic music. Around that place, the bustling street was dotted with neon lights and advertisements for other late-night establishments. The aroma of tobacco and perfume mixed in the air, while the night temperature was so low that it seemed like it wanted to freeze the city. I spent approximately 5 minutes admiring the night landscape, one that was full of ladies in low-cut dresses so short that I wondered if they were cold. At that moment I thought I had made a mistake. Perhaps Isabella lived somewhere nearby, and the address had not been precise because it didn't seem like a place she would frequent. But it wasn't until I saw her in line to enter the bar that I felt like adrenaline was rushing through my back. She was wearing a tight black dress that clung to every curve of her figure, highlighting her shapes with great sensuality. Her back was bare, while a plunging neckline revealed more than it should. I gasped in surprise when I saw Isabella, having to blink several times to make sure it was her and not a mirage. That was my daughter-in-law, the one who dressed modestly to visit me and my wife. Was that what she was hiding? It couldn't be any other way. My body reacted upset to her. On the one hand, my mind was confused when I discovered Isabella's secret, while on the other I could feel how my friend was starting to get excited at that sight, especially when I saw her bend down to pick something up from the floor. At that moment, I hesitated to enter the bar to find out all the details about the double life my daughter-in-law was leading, even without knowing that this would lead me to do something crazy. Inside, I blended into the crowd, trying not to be too obvious as I observed her behavior. After a few minutes of spotting her with a group of girls, I was not at all surprised to see that Isabella was far from the shy and reserved woman we all thought she was. The minutes passed while I watched her surround herself with several men at the same time, moving suggestively, drinking from several glasses, and laughing scandalously. She was, without a doubt, another Isabella, one that stopped seeming perfect to me and seemed more human, one who would have no problem sinning. I decided to sneak up on her, trying not to crouch into the middle of the drunk youth. I mingled among the people and finally reached her side. Undoubtedly, my presence there was striking as I was older, but she didn't seem to see me at first as she was immersed in the frenzy of the music and lights. When she finally realized my presence, her eyes widened as she turned pale. "Mr. Richard, what are you doing here?" she asked, surprised. I responded, trying to stay calm, even though I wanted to laugh at her expression, not as much as me. Isabella began to take each strand of her hair as she stroked it quickly. I soon understood that she was doing it out of nervousness, so I decided to get close to her ear and calm her down a little. "Don't worry, I won't tell Alexander I mentioned." Her expression changed from fear to calm in an instant, to be replaced by doubt. Why, she shrugged. "It doesn't seem relevant to me," I said. "I just want to know why you do it." Isabella didn't seem convinced, but she took my arm and dragged me to a quieter place where the music wasn't so loud. There, she told me that she knew that my wife did not like worldly women and that she really wanted to marry Alexander because he seemed like a good boy who would make an excellent husband. She swore to me that she was in love with my son, and if it hadn't been for the fact that I had seen her rubbing her body against several men at the bar, I would have believed her. However, something else was happening while we were talking. It was evident that I was physically attracted to that version of Isabella, and although I wanted to do it consciously, I couldn't help but take my eyes off her body. I knew from her attitude that I wasn't the only one experiencing this. Her eyes shone brighter than usual, while her hands played with her cleavage and neck. It was a clear indication that she was looking for something from me, but I wouldn't give in, not without her being more direct. "Mr. Richard, just Richard," I told her. She nodded, then wet her lips with her tongue, sat back in the chair, and looked at me. "Richard, what do you want in exchange for not saying anything to Alexander?" "I don't need anything in return, but I do." There was that voice again, the one I had heard in the restaurant bathroom, that whimper that almost made me lose my mind. At that moment I wanted to reward you for being a good father-in-law. I remained silent. There was something I wanted, but even after feeling that attraction for Isabella, I couldn't bring myself to ask for it. However, she seemed to read my mind because she decided to take control of the situation and take me by the hand to none other than the bathroom of the bar. Even though my back was pressed against the wall of one of the stalls in the women's bathroom and Isabella had placed the respective safety lock, I felt my body stiff with fear that someone might see us, that we might be taken out of the bathroom for inappropriate behavior. "Don't worry," she murmured in my ear. "Here, nobody pays attention to these things." I didn't have time to relax my body when I felt her hand on my waistband massaging, while her mouth sought mine to settle into a rough kiss. It was so fiery and wild that I found it overwhelming at first, but I liked it because Isabella was in control of the situation. It wasn't long before she was on her knees, having me in her mouth, moving her face back and forth quickly and forcefully. My mind was blank as I felt the heat in my area, and at the same time my hands were sinking into her hair. When I was about to reach my climax, I tried to pull back from her face, but it was impossible. She gripped my hips so tightly that I had no choice but to spill inside, watching as she deftly swallowed and wiped away any traces. I had not yet come down from my cloud when I saw her take off her clothes. With each garment that fell off, my excitement grew, and at the same time, a satisfied smile formed on her mouth. Then, forcefully, she sat me down on the toilet chair to continue what we had started, my reward. As I sank into her, curses and complaints came out of her mouth that made me move with more impetus. I no longer cared about where we were or that they could hear our bodies colliding. It was a sublime moment that I wanted to treasure, one that did not dissipate even when we had both managed to free ourselves together. Isabella came home one morning after several of our secret meetings. I had just gotten up when I saw my wife, my son, and my daughter-in-law sitting on the couch. For a moment, my heart wanted to jump out of my chest because of the fear that this caused me. I didn't want anyone to find out about our secret, about what I did, the times I lied to my wife to see me with her. However, their faces were happy. "Dad," Alexander mentioned. "There's news." I nodded, seated across from them on Mary's side. "Alexander has proposed to Isabella," my wife exclaimed eagerly. "Is that all right with you, Dad? Will you give us your blessing?" I gazed at Isabella, who appeared entirely different from the woman who had been beside me in bed the night before. It was amusing to observe her embody her persona, yet she executed it so convincingly that at times I fell for her act. At home, she maintained her facade as a devoted spouse and modest woman, but in private with me, she unveiled her most uninhibited and daring side. "You have my blessing," I assured him, excitement gleaming in Alexander's eyes. I merely smiled, watching Isabella cross her legs and adjust her hair. Naturally, such a stunning woman would make the ideal daughter-in-law, especially considering our evenings where her allure always welcomed me. To this day, my son remains oblivious to the truth. I understand that my actions don't align with being a good father, yet I confess, I repeatedly succumbed to temptation. Now it's over to you. How would you judge me for my choices? If you'd like to see more similar content, I'd appreciate your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Thank you, and until next time.